All right, guys, we're going to finish up imperialism here with imperialism or neo-imperialism. We're going to finish up China here. Neo or new imperialism is a little different than traditional imperialism like in Africa or in India. New imperialism is when a larger country will acquire new territory by politically controlling the smaller country's economy. So it's like a large multinational corporation sinking its tentacles into a different country. Industrialized Western countries would invest capital, right, money, equipment, industrial machines into a smaller, non-industrialized country that they would build into a powerful corporation. So a business, when it sinks its tentacles into the country, actually runs the small country's economy. It's a multinational corporation doing the imperializing rather than a country's government. So it's Google, it's McDonald's, it's Nike, it's British Petroleum, whatever. They are the new type of imperialists. The country and its multinational companies would build factories, transportation facilities, ports, and railroads. They would hire local natives to do all of the work. And while they gave local native people jobs, heavy labor for very low wages, the Europeans would insist on trade agreements that made money and always favored them. By military threat or bribery, local government officials would become wealthy. So I will take a local native governor or mayor and I will give him a high salary to exploit his own people. He doesn't care because he's getting rich. And one of the best examples of new or neo-imperialism happens in China. For centuries, China had controlled their own trade. However, after industrialization in the 1800s, the Western powers slowly began to impose their will and influence on China. Previous to this, there was the Cantonese system, where foreign ships were locked on the peninsula. They were not allowed into mainland China. They were restricted to those small ports. And with China as an ancient river valley civilization, they had always been able to maintain that delicate balance between what was exported and what they imported. China was always able to export more than they took in. But with the Industrial Revolution, the British began to slowly ask for more and more and more rights within China. And the Qing Dynasty emperor told the British absolutely not, saying, "You have nothing that we in China need. What do you have? We're a river valley civilization." Unfortunately, industrialization will change all of that. The best example is the Opium War. Take place in 4 years in China. By the late 1700s, the British realized they could trade opium grown in India for tea grown in China for enormous profit. We'll harvest opium from India for free. We'll take it and sell it to the Chinese for tea or silver. And then we'll take the tea and we'll sell it on the world market and we're getting 100% profit. We're not spending anything and we're getting rich. It's one of the greatest schemes in all of world history. Since opium was a consumable, addictive narcotic, Chinese got addicted and they wanted more and more and more. And the British say, well, spit, spot, cheerio, chap. We'll give you more, but in return we need this. More tea or more silver. For Great Britain, this is a win-win situation. They can't lose. And then the Chinese government wanted the opium trade stopped. And the English government said, absolutely not. Why would we stop? We're getting rich. So in 1839, the Chinese warships attacked British merchant vessels, starting what is known as the Opium Wars. In this war, England got to show off to flex their industrial muscle when the power of their new modern Navy ships simply destroyed China's military efforts. And when they're done, the Treaty of Nanking is written. And the Treaty of Nanking is the first in a series of treaties where China, loses control of their trading power. In 1842, the British force the Chinese to accept the treaty, which gives Great Britain control over trading in China. The British, no matter what, get the best deal. Very quickly, other industrial powers, France, the United States, quickly jump in. But as a result of the treaty, Great Britain receives the island of Hong Kong. They received war reparations, which is the Chinese had to pay damage to all British ships. What, like you scratch the paint on the hull of a British warship? It's called an indemnity. And the British also got to use more ports throughout China. To add insult to injury, Great Britain demanded extraterritoriality, which means that British citizens in China followed only English laws. If an Englishman got arrested in China, he was not subjected to Chinese laws or the Chinese court system. He would be turned over to the British, who you know were probably going to just let him go. Chinese government has no power over the British inside their territory. And the final blow to China was when Great Britain demanded something known as the Most Favored Nation Clause. Now this is an enormous trade aspect even in today's economy. It is where one country gets the same or better rights than every single one of its competitors. No matter what, one country always gets a leg up. So let's say, as an example, it costs the British a $5 docking fee to tie up at a port in China. And then the French negotiate, they only have to pay $4. Well, when the French only have to pay $4, England's docking fee is automatically lowered to $3. No matter what deal you give other countries, England always pays a less amount. They get the best deal. And because of this, it starts to kick off rebellions inside of China over how they're being treated by foreigners. And discontent towards the Qing dynasty begins to grow as the dynasty is hitting the bottom end of the dynastic cycle. China had experienced a population boom. And it made it very difficult to feed all of its people. Plus, the old river valleys were flooding out of control. So many people were starving and living in poverty, while the emperor lived that life of unreal luxury way up in the palace. And this is a very influential time of the world. Nationalism is growing over in Italy and in Germany. Major advancements had been made. The transatlantic cable had been laid linking Europe with the Americas. Karl Marx had written the Communist Manifesto. And while the rest of the world was developing and modernizing, China was stuck in time. And then a former teacher, it's always teachers who cause trouble, Hong Ziquan began to speak out against the Qing dynasty. And his efforts will capitalize the people in what is known as the Taiping Rebellion. In this rebellion, at least 20 million Chinese people were killed between 1850 and 1854. We talk about the American Civil War. We talk about Hitler and Stalin in World War II. Nobody talked 20 million people in China. 20 million. Teacher Hong had just wanted land reform for the peasants, better education for the young people so they could think and make decisions for themselves, better treatment of women, and above all, the number one thing he wanted was to end the dynasties that governed China for thousands of years. And it almost worked. The dynasty, the Qing, were pushed to almost their breaking point. But they were forced to ask and rely on help with their nobles in the provinces. And while China was dealing with its own internal disorders, it opened the doors for the industrial powers, Great Britain, France, Germany, to encroach slowly but surely the exact same way the British had done to India in the Mughal dynasty. And if things aren't as bad, here we go back to nationalism in Japan. 1894, 1895, China went to war with Japan. And the Japanese win, showing off their modern industrial techniques and capacity. Because of their victory, Japan takes the Korean Peninsula and the island of Taiwan from China, and other areas along the coast that were rich in natural resources. And the signing of this peace treaty is a pivotal moment because it shows the great disparity between the two nations. The Chinese showed up in their traditional silk robes, while the Japanese showed up in tuxedos wearing bowler hats like they were English gentlemen. China was no longer the dominant power it had once been. And when China is seen as weak, other countries begin to imperialize parts of China. Great Britain claims the Yangtze River Valley. The French will take over Southeast Asia and call it Indochina, what is today Vietnam. As a relative newcomer to the game of imperialism, the United States in 1899 forced everyone to agree to the open door policy. It meant that everyone should be a trade partner with China. No one can be excluded from trading in China. And as a result of the defeat to Japan, the Chinese saw the need for reform. But they were divided in their approach system. Some in China wanted to adopt Western ways to compete. Same thing we saw in the Congo, same thing we saw in India. We've got to find a way to compete. But most Confucian scholars were against it. Even though growing the economy was a necessity, merchants still, for thousands of years, have not been seen as important. Also losing sway were Christian missionaries who condemned traditional Chinese ways of life. Even though Confucianism had worked just fine for 4,000 years, and every time China gets in trouble, they looked at what would Confucius do. They get, Confucian scholar officials get slammed. And officials inside China said the country needs to be cautious, as Western technology was dangerous, Because once it's in place, we can't get rid of it. We can't borrow it for a time and then wipe the slate clean. Once we change, we change. And some Western ideas were attempted and tried. But the bulk of the Chinese Republic was mainly against it. The government never fully supported these reforms. They only kind of went into it half-heartedly to pacify some people. And as a result, it kicks off what is known as the Boxer Rebellion. Is here you have, Kaiser Wilhelm of Germany, the Tsar of Russia, you have Japan, you have France, you've got the Queen of England carving up China like a pizza, like they did to Africa. And here China's going, no, stop. You can see all these different colors. Yellow is France, orange is England, green is Germany, purple is Japan, red is Russia. China's getting carved up. And so a growing anger begins to develop towards all foreigners, which is called the Boxer Rebellion. And it takes place 1899, early 1900s, by a martial arts group known as the Righteous Harmonious Fists, which the Europeans called boxers after watching them train. Anger in China spills over as the boxers began to attack foreign companies for their treatment of Chinese citizens. But since China signed that agreement with Japan, they were required to allow other nations' militaries to take action if their businesses were threatened. The newly industrial Japan heads an international force that brutally puts down the Boxer Rebellion, and it only makes China angrier. But the failure of the Boxer Rebellion makes China have to make even more concessions to the industrialized powers. Eventually, China will begin to industrialize. It'll take until 1911, shortly before World War I, when China will experience the collapse of their 4,000-year-old dynastic cycle. The 31st and last dynasty is the Qing dynasty. Sun Yat-sen, who founds the Republic of China, we talked about it, the nationalism unit, will take over. And so from the end of the Industrial Revolution, the world gained the ingredients of nationalism and imperialism, and when they combine, they send Western Europe and the world heading down the road to World War I. So that's it for Chinese imperialism and new imperialism. Tomorrow we'll talk briefly about the Ottomans, and we'll hit World War I. All right, we'll see you guys.